All right, so for Module 4, we're going to be briefly discussing some of the main concepts from Module 3, but then moving into measurement and recording plan, graphing, and behavioral observations, which will kind of lead you to getting a good start on your own single system designs. So just a brief review. This is one of the bigger concepts for Social Work 793 that a lot of people struggle with, is just operationally defined problems. So I think it's worth going over it twice. So operationally defined problems should be defined in the following way: the number of times a behavior occurs per unit of time. This could be, again, minutes spent exercising per day, the client score on a standardized measure, or the amount of something. So you could do like daily score on a Beck depression inventory. It could also be the amount of something, money spent per unit of time for somebody who had impulsive spending problems, for instance. And as we come up with goals based on those operationally defined problems, we're always going to want to try to increase or decrease that operationally defined problem, or potentially extinguish it altogether. So if it's something like smoking cessation, probably a good idea to try to get down to zero as best as you can. So regarding the big picture practice evaluation, we're going to be looking at goals, measures, evaluation design, and ultimately analysis. So hopefully within this module, I'll pull it all together. So whenever possible, try to use two different instruments or measures to measure a client's problem operationally defined. So for this course, I'd like for you to try to get maybe one of 4 different measurement types that we're going to be discussing, whether it be behavioral observation measure, log, standardized measure, or individualized rating scale. So a good measurement and recording plan should include the following: the name of the measures, what will be collected, when and where the data will be collected, and how often the data will be collected. Procedures of the measurement and recording plan should be standardized, good enough so that if somebody were to replicate the single system design, or potentially even pick up where you left off, that they would be able to replicate the study and come up with pretty comparable results. And graphing is also going to be a big component of this course. So we'll look at different ways that you can graph your single system design. So this is just an example of how you can graph single system designs. We'll talk about a baseline phase, which in this graph is illustrated by the letter A. A would be the baseline. You can see on the horizontal line would be school weeks 1 through 34, and the vertical line is attendance from 0 to 5. So the operationally defined problem here is the number of full days Rick attends a school day. So you can see in the baseline, in the first weeks, he only went for a full day twice in the first week and once in the second week. As we move over to the B phase, which is the intervention phase, he starts to go 4 to 5 days a week. An M phase would be a maintenance phase, where maybe there's just supportive intervention, but not like a regular intervention, or maybe a less frequent intervention, and then follow-up. So this is another example written up, but this is overall like test score averages over school weeks, so weekly grades. Another example here of baseline, intervention, and a maintenance phase. And lastly, individualized rating scale. As of today, I feel confident about my performance. And just one last important thing to think about with graphs is you would also want to record missing data. So if there's a 0 even, you'd still want to record that too. And for missingness, sometimes you might have to do like an average between the scores that weren't missed. That'll be something that we'll talk about moving forward. So now within practice evaluation, we've covered goals and operationally defined problems. So let's move on into measurement a little bit more. So regarding behavioral observation, what are behaviors? Behaviors can be observed directly, retrospectively, or objectively. Behaviors can be just about any action that a human does, really. There's some debates over whether even thoughts are behaviors. So many mental behaviors in there. So number of negative thoughts about someone has about themselves per day, for instance. So behavioral observation measures most often count how often a certain behavior occurs within a specified period of time. Behavioral observation measures also record the duration or the amount of the behavior. So we could think about number of minutes spent exercise per day, minutes of sleeps per night. Those are all behaviors specified within a certain time frame. An accurate behavioral observation involves specifically defining the behavior in terms of a beginning and an end. A clear beginning and a clear end might be something really simple if it's a cigarette smoked, but it might be a little bit more complicated if it's something like sleep, where it's hard to get a more specific start and end time. but there are certain steps that we can do to try to get as close to it as possible. Behavioral observation can involve continuous recording or behavioral sampling. Something that a lot of students have been doing recently is using like Fitbit or Apple Watch or something along those lines in order to get a continuous rating. And behavioral observations can be completed by the client, the practitioner, relevant other, and behavioral observation measures can actually be pretty relatively simple instruments to use.